Sometimes, life changes in moments we never planned for, not in boardrooms or at celebrations, but in small, quiet encounters that shift something deep inside us. This is a story of a powerful woman who had everything: success, respect, control, until a broken engine in the rain brought her face to face with a little boy who had nothing, and yet gave her everything she had been missing. It's a story about kindness that humbles, love that heals, and how one selfless act can rebuild a life that looked perfect on the outside but was falling apart within. If you believe real change starts with a single moment of truth, stay till the end of this story, and don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic, raw life stories that touch the heart and remind us what truly matters. That it's strange how quickly power feels useless when you're standing in the rain, staring at an engine that won't start. That afternoon, I remember watching the wipers slow to a stop, the sound of rain hitting metal, and realizing I had no control, not over the car, not over the storm, and maybe not over my life. For years, I had built a reputation on control. Every meeting, every decision, every deal, I was always the one people looked to when things went wrong. Claire Dalton fixes everything, they used to say. But that day, in that rain, I couldn't fix a thing. I stepped out of the car, heels sinking into mud, umbrella useless against the wind. The road was empty, except for the sound of my own frustration. It wasn't just the car, something deeper inside me had stopped moving a long time ago. That's when I saw him, a boy, no older than 6 or 7, standing under a torn plastic sheet across the road. He looked like he didn't belong to the same world as me. His clothes were soaked, his shoes probably older than him, but his eyes, they were calm, steady. When he noticed me, he ran over without hesitation. "Your car's not working," he asked, breathless but certain, as if this was something he did every day. I nodded, more out of surprise than agreement. Before I could stop him, he was already peering under the hood, small hands moving with a kind of focus I hadn't seen in years. Rain poured down his hair, but he didn't flinch. He asked for nothing, not even my name. I remember standing there, watching this little stranger fix something I couldn't, feeling a strange warmth under all that rain. I wanted to tell him to stop, that it wasn't safe, that I could call someone, but I didn't. For once, I just let someone else take control. A few minutes later, the engine coughed back to life. He looked up at me, a small grin forming on his lips. "It's okay now," he said, wiping his hands on his shirt. I reached for my purse, pulled out some cash, and offered it to him. He shook his head immediately. "You don't take money for helping people stuck in the rain," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And just like that, he ran off, back to the plastic shelter, back to wherever he belonged. I stood there for a long moment, holding the money, staring at the empty road. There was something humbling in that moment, being helped by someone who had so little but gave so freely. It felt like the first crack in the shell I had built around my life. When I got back into the car, I didn't start driving right away. I sat there, listening to the hum of the engine he had fixed, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel proud of what I had achieved. I felt small, but in a good way, the kind of small that reminds you there's still something left to learn. On the way back to the city, I kept thinking about that boy, about how calm he was, about the certainty in his voice when he said no to the money. I tried to imagine where he lived, who taught him that kind of integrity at such a young age. In my world, everything had a price. Yet he was a child who believed some things shouldn't. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. Even that night, when I came home to my clean apartment overlooking the skyline, the image of that soaked boy lingered in my mind more than any boardroom victory ever had. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and realized how quiet my life really was. I had everything people worked for: power, security, respect, and yet none of it could match the simplicity of that boy's gesture. He had given without asking, helped without expecting, something I hadn't done in a long time. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that single act in the rain, had already started to change me. The next morning, while going through my schedule, my eyes stopped at a blank space between meetings. It felt strange, almost wrong, that there was nothing there. For years, my life had been a list of things to fix, people to impress, results to deliver. But that day, I wrote one simple note in that empty slot. Find the boy. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was just the quiet pull of something real after years of pretending everything was fine. All I knew was that the storm had ended, but something inside me had just begun. That day, I drove back toward the edge of the city, toward the place where glass towers fade into worn streets and muddy roads. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I knew it wasn't a mechanic anymore. It was a reason. And deep down, I think I already understood. The engine he fixed wasn't just the one under the hood. It was mine. I didn't find the boy that day. I drove through the narrow streets until the buildings turned into small shops, until the city's noise faded into the hum of people simply surviving. Still, there was no sign of him. Just rain puddles, rusted shutters, and faces that had stopped expecting anything new. But before turning back, I saw it. A small, half-open shed with a faded sign that read Tom's Garage. Inside, a man was bent over an old motorcycle, his hands moving with the same kind of patience I had seen in the boys. I stopped the car and stepped out. The air smelled of oil and metal, sharp but strangely comforting. The man looked up. His face was rough, the kind that had worked through too many hard days, but his eyes were kind. "You must be Claire Dalton," he said quietly, as if he already knew. It caught me off guard. "How do you know my name?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "My son told me. The boy you met yesterday, Lucas." The name felt familiar, even though I had never heard it before. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and looked around the place. It wasn't really a garage, more like an open space with a roof and tools that had seen better years. No walls, no office, no order. And yet, it felt alive. Tom poured tea into a cup and handed it to me. "He was worried you might have been stuck again," he said. "He wanted to come check this morning, but school comes first." There was something in his tone, gentle, steady, that reminded me of how long it had been since anyone had spoken to me without agenda. No one here knew who I was beyond a broken-down car and a woman lost in the rain. It felt freeing. We talked for a while, mostly about Lucas, about how he liked taking apart things just to see how they worked, about how he'd lost his mother when he was little, and how the garage became their home. Tom spoke with a calmness that came from acceptance, not defeat. He wasn't chasing anything. He was simply living. At one point, I said quietly, "He's a good boy." Tom smiled, eyes still on the engine he was fixing. "He is. He reminds me that even when life breaks, it can be fixed, just takes time and steady hands." That line stayed with me, maybe because it sounded like something I needed to hear. I left that day thinking it was just a visit, a gesture of gratitude. But something about that place stayed in my mind. The way they worked without complaint. The way silence wasn't awkward there. The way the sound of tools clinking felt more honest than half the conversations I'd had in years. A week later, I went back. I told myself it was just to drop off some spare parts from my old car, but deep down, I knew I wanted to see them again. Lucas ran up to me as soon as he saw my car. "You came back," he said, excitement in his voice that felt pure, untouched by expectation. "I had a promise to keep," I said softly. Tom was working on an old truck, sleeves rolled, grease on his hands. He looked up, gave a small nod. "Didn't think CEOs had time for places like this," he said, half teasing. "I didn't think I did either," I replied. He laughed lightly, then went back to work. "Then maybe it's time you found some." That day, I stayed longer than I planned. I sat on a wooden stool near the corner, watching them work. Lucas asked endless questions. Tom answered each one with patience. I listened more than I spoke. For someone who'd spent her life talking, directing, and deciding, that silence was something new. At one point, Tom handed me a small wrench. "Want to help?" I looked at him, unsure. "I've never fixed anything in my life," I admitted. He smiled. "Then it's a good day to start." We worked side by side, my hands clumsy, his steady. The smell of oil stuck to my fingers, but I didn't mind. For once, it didn't matter who I was outside that place. Inside that open garage with no walls, I was just a woman learning something simple and honest. When the sun began to set, I stood at the edge of the road. The rain had left small puddles that reflected the orange light. Lucas waved goodbye, his laughter echoing through the open space. Tom leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You're welcome here anytime," he said. "Thank you," I replied. And I meant it. Driving back to the city that evening, I felt a quiet ache, not sadness, but something like recognition. It's strange how the smallest places can hold the biggest truths. I had spent my whole life building walls around my job, my emotions, my heart. But that garage, it had none. And somehow, that made it feel more like home than anything I'd built. When I reached my apartment that night, I didn't go straight to my laptop or check the dozens of messages waiting for me. I just sat in the dark, oil still faintly on my hands, and whispered to myself. It felt real. I think that's when it began. Not love, not change, but the slow return to something I didn't realize I'd lost. A sense of being human again. It's strange how easily a habit begins, not the kind that drains you, but the kind that quietly fills a space you didn't know was empty. Visiting the garage became that for me. It wasn't planned. It wasn't scheduled. It just started happening, like the way rain turns to sunlight without anyone noticing when. Sometimes, I'd stop by after a meeting, still dressed in clothes that didn't belong in that place. Other times, on weekends, I'd just show up with tea or sandwiches. No one asked me why. Tom would nod, Lucas would smile, and the day would move like it always did, slow, honest, unhurried. The city always felt loud, full of ambition, noise, and people talking over each other. But there, in that open space with its clanking tools and distant hum of engines, I heard something I hadn't heard in years. Silence. The kind that doesn't scare you, the kind that heals you. Tom worked with focus, saying little. Lucas talked enough for both of them. I often sat on the same wooden stool, watching them fix things that others would have thrown away. Old engines, broken radios, rusted bicycles. Somehow, everything found new life there. I began to realize how rare that was in my world. In business, things and people were replaced the moment they stopped working. Here, they were repaired. One afternoon, Lucas asked, "Do you fix things too?" I smiled. I used to think I did. Companies, numbers, people. He tilted his head. "And now?" "Now," I said after a pause, "I'm not so sure." Tom glanced up from his work, his expression soft but unreadable. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he understood more than he let on. Those days had a rhythm. Morning light through the metal roof, tea boiling on a small stove, Lucas running around with endless questions. Tom's patience amazed me. I asked him once how he managed it. He said, "When you fix things for a living, you learn that rushing never helps. You wait, listen, and then you move." I thought about that long after. Waiting, listening, two things I'd forgotten how to do. My old life was all about urgency. Now, the stillness was teaching me something new. As weeks passed, I started leaving my phone in the car. The first time I did it, it felt wrong, like I was missing oxygen. But soon, I realized I wasn't missing anything important. The world kept moving without me, and that was okay. There were days I didn't speak much, just watched. Tom's hands were steady, even graceful in their own way. There was beauty in his simplicity, no need to prove, no need to impress. Just quiet competence. Once, as I handed him a wrench, I said, "You ever wish for more?" He looked at me, wiping sweat from his forehead. "More what?" "More than this," I said, gesturing around. "A bigger shop, better tools, maybe an easier life." He smiled faintly. "This is enough. I've had days with more money and less peace. I'd rather keep the peace." That answer settled in my chest like a truth I'd been avoiding. For years, I'd chased everything: success, reputation, control, and ended up lonely in a world built on walls. And here was a man with so little, yet richer in all the ways that mattered. One evening, it started raining again. I was about to leave, but Lucas begged me to stay. Tom found an old stool and told me to sit while he closed the tools. The rain hit the tin roof in waves, and the smell of wet earth mixed with oil and tea. It felt almost sacred, like time had slowed down just for us. Lucas started telling me about his dreams, how he wanted to build his own workshop someday, how he'd fix cars for free for people who couldn't afford it. His innocence made me smile. "That's a big dream," I said. He nodded seriously. "Dad says dreams don't have to be big to matter. Just honest." Tom looked at me when Lucas said that. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something there, not romance, not yet, but understanding. A quiet recognition between two people who had both lost things they couldn't name. By the time the rain stopped, it was dark. I stayed longer than I should have. Tom offered to walk me to the car, but I told him I'd be fine. "You'll catch cold," he said, half smiling. "I've survived worse," I replied. He chuckled softly. "I can tell." I don't remember what made me turn back before leaving, but I did. I saw him standing under the dim light, watching Lucas clean up the tools. For a brief second, the sight of that, a father teaching his son, laughter in the air, warmth and simplicity, felt more real than anything I'd built in all my years of success. Driving home that night, I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of my own thoughts. The city lights flickered through the windshield, but my mind was still in that garage, hearing the rain, the laughter, the steady rhythm of work. That's when I realized what I'd been chasing all along wasn't success. It was peace, and for the first time in years, I'd caught a glimpse of it, in the sound of ordinary days. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. In my world, nothing stays private for long, not even kindness. One Monday morning, as I entered the glass building that bore my name, I could feel the air shift. Subtle glances, brief pauses in conversation, the kind that carry judgment, not curiosity. By lunchtime, I knew why. Someone had seen me at the garage. A woman in a raincoat, sharing tea with a mechanic and his son. That image, stripped of title, stripped of status, was spreading faster than any company memo ever had. In boardrooms built on perception, appearance is everything. You're only as respected as the distance you keep, and I had crossed it without even realizing. At first, I tried to laugh it off. I told myself it didn't matter. But when my assistant hesitated before speaking, when colleagues exchanged looks during meetings, when the chairman asked if I was doing all right lately, it hit me. The same people who once admired my leadership now doubted my stability. That evening, I sat alone in my office long after everyone had left. The skyline glowed outside, cold and brilliant, like 1,000 unfeeling eyes. I thought about the garage, the warmth, the simplicity, and felt a kind of ache that words couldn't explain. Tom once told me that peace has a price. I never asked what he meant. Now I knew. The next day, I went back to the garage anyway. Lucas ran to greet me, his hands stained with grease. "You came," he said, grinning. "I needed air," I replied. Tom was tightening a bolt under a car hood. He looked up briefly, nodded, then went back to work. There was no pretense with him, no performance, no curiosity about what others thought. Just calm presence. I helped Lucas hand him tools. The silence was comfortable, almost protective. But after a while, I said quietly, "People at my company think I've lost my mind." Tom didn't look up. "Because you spent time here." I gave a small, dry laugh. "Because I stopped pretending." He wiped his hands and finally met my eyes. "Then maybe you found your mind." For a moment, neither of us spoke. His words hung there, simple and solid, like a truth too obvious to argue with. I told him about the whispers, about the questions from the board, about how it all felt like being pushed out of a world I'd built with my own hands. He listened, not with pity, but with the quiet understanding of someone who's known loss before. He said, "You can't live for people who only see the surface. They'll always mistake reflection for depth." It wasn't advice. It was experience. That night, when I drove home, I noticed something strange. The city hadn't changed. I had. The things that once impressed me now looked hollow. The fine restaurants, the black cars, the conversations about deals and growth, all of it felt like noise pretending to be meaning. The next morning, I walked into the office as usual. Heads turned, whispers followed. But for the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I let them look, let them wonder. In the meeting room, the chairman brought up a tabloid photo, me, standing beside Tom's garage, handing Lucas a cup of tea. The headline read, CEO's Unusual Company. He asked, "Is this real?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Yes." Silence. Then a faint scoff from one of the directors. "You understand how this looks," he said. "I do," I replied. "It looks human." No one spoke after that. The meeting ended early. But walking out of that room, I felt lighter than I had in years. Later that evening, I found myself back at the garage again. I didn't even realize I'd driven there. Tom was closing up. "You had a long day," he said. "Too long," I admitted. "But it ended well." He smiled slightly. "Then maybe it was worth it." Lucas ran up with a small box. "Look, Claire. We fixed your old radio." Inside was a broken car radio I'd left there weeks ago. I didn't even think they'd kept it. Tom said it just needed a few new wires. "It still works, just not perfectly." I turned the dial. The static faded into a soft tune, faint but clear. For some reason, it made my eyes sting. "That's life, isn't it?" I said softly. "Never perfect, but still working." Tom nodded. "If you listen closely, even static has music." That night, I sat in my car long after they'd gone inside. The rain started again, slow, gentle. Through the windshield, I could see the faint light from their workshop, a place that had become something more than shelter. I realized then, appearances can crumble, but truth endures quietly. And maybe, losing face in the world's eyes was the only way to finally find mine. It happened on a Thursday, quiet, unassuming, like most turning points in my life. I was at the garage, watching Tom teach Lucas how to balance a tire when my phone started vibrating on the workbench. I'd almost forgotten what that sound felt like, urgent, insistent, like a knock you don't want to answer. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Claire Dalton." The voice was professional, polished. "This is Daniel Pierce, from Meridian Holdings. We've been trying to reach you." I wiped my hands, glancing at Tom and Lucas. "I'm listening." He continued, "We'd like to discuss a proposal. Our board wants to bring you on as executive chair. We believe your leadership could stabilize the company's global operations. Name your terms." I felt the air shift around me. The sound of tools clinking, the smell of oil. Suddenly, all of it felt distant. The world I'd left behind had found me again. "I'll think about it," I said, before hanging up. Tom looked at me curiously. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. "An offer?" He didn't ask for details. He just nodded, went back to work, and said quietly, "Be sure it's something you want, not something you miss." That line stayed with me. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the offer itself, but what it represented. Validation, return, respect. All the things I thought I didn't care about anymore, whispering again like ghosts at the edge of my conscience. That night, I sat by my window, staring at the city lights. Somewhere out there, the people who once doubted me were waiting for me to rise again. They would say it was a comeback. They would call it redemption. But would it be? Or would it just be the same prison with better walls? The next morning, Daniel called again. "We're sending over the contract," he said. "It's a generous package. Full control, equity, your own team. Everyone's excited at the idea of your return." I thanked him politely. But as I hung up, my stomach tightened. Excited at the idea, not the person. They didn't care about who I'd become. They only wanted the version of me that fit their narrative. That afternoon, I drove back to the garage. Tom was outside, cleaning a carburetor. He looked up and smiled. "You look like someone carrying a heavy decision." "I am," I admitted. He set down the pot and leaned against the table. "Then tell me." So I did. I told him about the offer, the money, the title, the power. I told him how everyone expected me to take it, how part of me still wanted to. He listened quietly, then said, "If you go back, what do you think you'll find there?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Familiarity," I said. "Structure, purpose, maybe." "And what will you lose?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was heavy. "Peace," I said finally. "And maybe, myself." Tom nodded slowly. Then you already know the answer. I looked at him, realizing he wasn't advising me, he was reminding me. The decision had already been made, deep down, in the quiet part of me that had changed while no one was watching. That evening, I met Daniel at a cafe downtown. He came prepared, folders, contracts, rehearsed excitement. You'll have full autonomy, he said. We'll announce it as a strategic return, a sign of stability. You'll be back where you belong. I smiled faintly. And where's that, Daniel? He hesitated, caught off guard. At the top, of course. I looked out the window at the passing cars. You know, I said, I used to think the top meant freedom. But now I see it's just another floor, higher maybe, but still inside the same building. He didn't understand. Most people wouldn't. I slid the folder back toward him. I'm not coming back, I said. Not to that life. He blinked. Claire, think carefully. You're walking away from everything you built. No, I said softly. I'm walking toward what I finally understand. He sat back, frustrated but polite. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but at least it'll be my choice. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, like the city itself had exhaled. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was stillness, the kind that comes after you finally stop running. I drove straight to the garage. Lucas was asleep on a chair. Tom was cleaning up. You said no, he guessed, without looking at me. I did. He smiled. Then you made room for something better. I stood there for a while, just watching him work in the quiet hum of the night. For the first time in years, I wasn't anyone's boss, or symbol, or name. I was just a person, tired, real, and finally free. Some endings don't come with music or applause. They arrive quietly, like the moment you realize you've already changed, and there's no going back. Weeks passed after I turned down the offer. The news spread, of course. Some called it reckless. Others called it brave. But I stopped caring what they called it. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to define what success meant for me. The company I built continued without me. New faces filled my old office. New headlines replaced my name. And strangely, that didn't hurt. It felt natural, like watching a chapter close that had already served its purpose. Most mornings, I still went to the garage. It wasn't about escaping anymore. It was about belonging. The rhythm of that place, the laughter, the clatter of tools, the hum of engines, became my heartbeat. Lucas grew taller. Tom started taking on more clients. I helped where I could, making coffee, organizing parts, sometimes just sitting on that same wooden stool, feeling at peace in the noise. One afternoon, Lucas asked me, "Do you ever miss your office?" I smiled. Sometimes, but not the way you think. He frowned. Then how? I miss the feeling that I mattered, I said. But I've realized that mattering doesn't always mean being seen. He nodded, even if he didn't fully understand. I think one day he will. A few weeks later, a storm rolled in. The kind that paints the sky dark before the rain even starts. It reminded me of the day I met them. The rain, the broken car, the strange sense that something important had begun without warning. When the downpour started, Tom pulled down the shutters halfway. "Looks like we're stuck here for a bit," he said. I laughed. Wouldn't be the first time. We made tea on the small stove. The rain roared on the roof, thunder echoing in the distance. Lucas sat near the door, humming to himself while tinkering with an old radio. "Still trying to fix that?" I asked. He grinned. "Almost there." Tom leaned back on the stool beside me. "You know," he said, "the first time you showed up, I thought you'd never come back." I almost didn't, I admitted. I was too used to running. From what? From silence, I said softly. From myself. He nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "And now?" "Now," I said, watching the rain blur the world outside, "I think I've stopped running." We sat there for a while without speaking. The kind of silence that feels full, not empty. When the rain finally eased, Lucas called out, "It works." The radio crackled, then came alive, the same old tune I'd heard the night Tom gave it back to me. Only this time, It sounded clearer. Stronger. Tom smiled. Guess even old things can sound new again. I looked at him and said quietly, yes, if someone takes the time to fix them. Something in that moment felt complete. Not perfect, but whole. That night, as I drove home through the damp streets, the city looked different. Softer. The glass towers that once felt like cages now just looked like part of the skyline. When I reached home, I didn't rush inside. I stood by the car for a long moment, listening to the faint echo of rain. My reflection shimmered on the wet pavement, a woman I barely recognized, but finally liked. I thought about calling Tom, maybe to thank him, maybe just to talk. But then I smiled to myself. Some connections don't need constant words to stay alive. They live in gestures, in memories, in quiet respect. The next morning, I left early, not for work, but for a drive. No destination. Just the road, the air, the open world. As I passed the intersection where it all began, where my car had once broken down in the rain, I slowed down. The sky was clear this time. The road was empty. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel lost. Because home wasn't a place, or a position, or a title. It was this: peace in motion, meaning in small moments, the ability to stand still inside myself and not feel afraid. I rolled down the window, felt the air on my face, and smiled. Sometimes life doesn't give you what you wanted, it gives you what you needed to become whole. The road stretched ahead, endless and open. And I drove, not to arrive anywhere, but to keep becoming. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, follow, and share your opinion in the comments.